Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 117 of Contemplating Life. Over the past 3 episodes, I've been chronicling my struggles to maintain my benefits and to continue to live in my own home, where I could feel safe and maintain the quality of life that I'm accustomed to. I've been telling the story mostly chronologically. However, we're going to fast forward through some of these events to reach the current conditions. I was going to tell you the story of how I met my roommate, Barbara, and our history as friends for nearly 40 years. And I'll eventually go back and talk more about our friendship. I had an episode chronicling the early years half written, but we need to skip those details and move quickly through several years of history to get where we need to be in this saga. After my dad died, I tried to recruit a roommate who would take over my care. My old friend Barb, who I met online in 1981, moved here with her adult son, Josh, on Sunday, May 12, 2019, which was Mother's Day. This kept me out of the nursing facility for over 6 years, including throughout the COVID pandemic. Over the years, we had our ups and downs. Ultimately, Barb had severe burnout as my caregiver. I wasn't able to give her very much time off. I have this wonderful respite nurse, Tony, who's here on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And occasionally my sister, Carol, would come for a few days so Barb could have a weekend off. Barb had a boyfriend who lived in Toledo, whom she would occasionally visit. And sometimes he would come here for a visit for several days. But unfortunately, that relationship eventually ended. Now, Barb loves to sew. She developed a business selling quilted items, such as blankets, table toppers, and soup bowl cozies. She tried selling them on eBay and Etsy. However, her biggest success was selling at weekend craft shows. Carol would come stay with me while Barb and Josh went to the craft shows. And they did this for several weekends throughout 2023. However, for 2024, Carol said it was too much. She had other obligations, helping her daughter Elena with their new baby boy, Beckett. Without sufficient time off, it was just too much for Barb as well. She and Josh announced they would be leaving by the end of the year. In May 2024, Barb and I both began having severe health problems. Over the course of 6 weeks, each of us was hospitalized 3 times. The straw that broke the camel's back was when Barb delayed going to the hospital because she was concerned about who would stay with me. I had some friends and family who could be emergency backup. I was going to be okay. I just couldn't deal with the idea that she was risking her health for me. In episode 66, I told the story of how an incompetent nurse nearly killed me during one of those hospitalizations. And while I was in the emergency room before that nurse tried to kill me, Carol and I concluded this could not go on any longer. Barb was miserable. I couldn't bear living with someone who didn't want to be here. The guilt was too much for me. And her health was failing, and so was mine. It seemed like every decision I was making had at its root, whose life am I going to ruin the least based on this decision? Carol agreed to come in and take over my care. We would ask Barb and Josh to leave earlier than they had planned. We set the deadline for the end of September. This was one of the most difficult choices I've ever made in my life. And naturally, they were both pretty pissed off. I'll spare you the details of all that out of respect for my friends. We finally found an apartment and moved out in early October. Carol moved in and took over my care. I still had my home health aides to come get me up in the morning and put me back to bed at night. And we still had respite care on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Carol found a really good skilled nursing facility called Wellbrook in Avon, a suburb about 30 minutes west of my house, and she put me on the waiting list. We had a heart-to-heart conversation, and I asked her to at least let me try to find a new roommate. The problem was I had limited finances. I still do. We had to have a massive repair job done on our plumbing system, and we incurred about $14,000 of high-interest credit card debt. We later added to that debt because we needed a new water heater and a new furnace. Money from my trust fund and some financial supporters who would prefer to remain anonymous has been used to service this debt and can't be used to pay for a caregiver. On the advice of a friend at church who's a realtor, we tried to obtain a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit. We would get a much better interest rate than our current credit card. We could also use some of the money to fix up the house so it would be easier to sell when I eventually moved to a nursing facility. You can put about $20,000 into a house and increase its selling price by $40,000. If we were forced to sell the house as is, the purchaser would probably fix it up and flip it for a profit. Now, Carol and my other sister, Karen, own the house, and they should benefit from those profits. Karen is also dealing with high-interest debt, and she could benefit from leveraging her home equity to improve her financial situation. Carol had been babysitting her new grandson for nearly a year and hadn't been working. And when she moved here, I could give her some of my home health aid hours. But it wasn't enough work history that she could obtain a loan. And the bank took a long time to tell us that. That's a long story, not worth telling. Now, I have to admit, I felt the positive side effect of this plan was it might keep me in the house a bit longer. From October 2024 until June 2025, I admit I didn't do much to move beyond the status quo of Carol staying here. I didn't think I could pursue a roommate until our finances were in better shape. Over Thanksgiving 2024, Carol's oldest daughter, Brittany, who lives in Texas, came to visit with her husband and her daughter, Liliana. Brittany's adult son, Jordan, didn't make the trip. Elena and her kids also moved in for the weekend, and we had a magnificent time playing games and eating and just having a blast. It had been years since I'd had that much fun with family, and I'll treasure the memory of that weekend for the rest of my life. On and off throughout this period, Carol's youngest daughter, Heather, who's in her early 30s, was living here with her dog, Stevie. Stevie is not housebroken, and Heather seems unmotivated to do much about it. The dog barks excessively. Any time a car drives by or a neighbor comes out of the house, the dog goes wild. We had to remove the carpet in my office and my bedroom because we couldn't get the dog stains out. Heather had planned to drive to Texas with Brittany after Thanksgiving, and then move to Arizona to be near her half-brother, Tony. Although Brittany and her family helped Heather load a storage pod before leaving for Texas, Heather didn't move until February of 2025. Ultimately, she didn't like it. She tried to get a job, but couldn't find one close to her apartment. She wanted to be able to go home for lunch to check on the dog. After a few months, she moved back here, and she's currently living here. She's been living off an inheritance from her father, who passed away from COVID. Pardon me for speaking ill of the dead, but the idiot, God rest his soul, refused to get vaccinated, even though he had respiratory issues. His story angered me so much that I wrote a sci-fi murder mystery about a guy who wanted to kill off all the stupid people who refused to get vaccinated. I'll tell you more about that story someday. The villain in that story represented more of me than I'd like to admit. Anyway, still a bit traumatized from losing her dad, and I understand that. Heather seems unmotivated to do much with her life, and I really worry about her. For a while, I sort of used her as an excuse not to move forward with any of our plans. Carol wasn't sure what she would be doing once I was in a facility, and Heather had nowhere to go, so I was content to live with the status quo. The wake-up call came in June 2025 when Carol developed pneumonia. In the past, if something happened to Barb, I had Carol as a backup. But when Carol got sick, I had no backup. Carol and Heather went to the Indy 500 on May 25th, and Carol must have caught something in that crowd of over 300,000 people. On the 30th, she went to the ER, and my friend Rich stayed with me. Meanwhile, my dear friend, Father Paul Landwerland, who I've spoken much about in these episodes, passed away on May 26th at age 91. I missed going to his visitation on June 1st because Carol was sick. On Wednesday the 4th, it looked like Carol was doing better. But then on Thursday, my nurse Tony was here most of the day, and I didn't see Carol. She stayed in her room, and I was happy to let her rest. It was her day off. Tony could handle it. However, shortly after the nurse left at 4 p.m., I went in to talk to Carol. I should have checked in on her sooner, before the nurse left. Carol was in terrible shape. I asked the question I didn't want to ask, but I knew I had to. I said, "If it wasn't for me, would you be going to the ER right now?" And she said yes. I said, "Then let's make that happen." From the minute Barb moved out, I swore that I would not make the same mistakes with Carol that I made with Barb. But now it was deja vu all over again. Someone was delaying their health needs on my behalf. I couldn't deal with that. I called my friend Rich to see what his availability was. He and his wife Kathy were out to dinner with some of Kathy's friends. He would not be able to get here until later that evening. So I called Nurse Tony, and she was able to come back until Rich could get there. Rich arrived around 9 p.m. and stayed the night. That was a first for both of us. Carol came home from the ER in the wee hours of the morning. That morning, while one of my aides was getting me dressed, my G-tube fell out. That meant an ambulance trip to the ER for me. In a weird way, it was fortuitous. It meant Carol didn't have to deal with me all day. The ER was my babysitter. Over that weekend, my niece Elena, her kids, and their giant dog, Groot, moved in to help Carol and me. I had fun with my great-nephew, Leighton, as we tried out a new drone I just purchased. I had lost the old one. Long story for another time. Throughout the weekend, Elena had some choice words for me about how this could not go on. I told her Carol's illness was a wake-up call for me. I assured her that Carol and I would be having some serious conversations once she recovered. But in the meantime, this was a decision for me and Carol to make. Her opinion was duly noted, but she didn't get a vote. Elena stayed until Monday, and by Tuesday, Carol was doing much better. I had my aide, Trey Sean, stay with me, while Carol took a previously planned trip to Illinois for a memorial service for Brittany's grandmother. Over the next few days, we had some big adventures that are a bit unrelated to our current story, but I'll tell them anyway. On June 16th, I had an intake appointment to begin seeing a mental health counselor. When I first made this decision to seek help, it was because my old issues with the fear of death had been rising to uncomfortable levels. I struggled with this in my late 20s, right before I returned to the church. And as I've explained in previous episodes, those issues were mitigated once I got involved in church. It wasn't so much that I now had a faith in an afterlife. It's just that I was so busy living, I didn't have time to think about dying. See episodes 12 and 14 of this podcast for details. These days, I don't have the opportunity to do much fulfilling work. I occasionally work on assistive technology designs. I'm struggling to get published as a fiction author with no success. I do this podcast, which keeps me busy, but it doesn't provide much positive feedback, so I don't feel like I'm contributing much to the world. I'm not living as fully as I used to, so there's more time to think about dying. I consider I was worried about death in my late 20s. Think of the impact that concern has in my late 60s. Those fears are much more realistic. Now, in addition to those issues, I had to face the question of what to do about my living situation. I just needed someone who wasn't involved that I could talk to. I wasn't necessarily looking for advice or answer to my problems. Unless they could cure SMA or give me thousands of dollars, there were no solutions to my problems. I just needed to vent. On June 18, I had an appointment with my pulmonary doctor. On the way home, we were southbound on I-465, on the west side, just north of the I-65 exit. Suddenly, we heard a loud, rumbling noise. We both thought it was a semi coming up behind us, or to pass us. The van had been wiggling back and forth a bit, but I thought it was just from the wind, and Carol had thought the same thing. At one point, I began to wonder if the noise was a low-flying airplane about to crash. I'd never heard anything like it. Carol eventually realized we had a flat tire and pulled over to the shoulder of the road. Up ahead, we could see mile marker 20.1. I've included a Google Street View link. It was the left rear tire. Had it been a front tire, we could have easily lost control and crashed. We determined my AAA roadside service had expired, so Carol called them to see if we could renew it over the phone and have them send us some help. All the while, cars and trucks are speeding past us just inches away at 60 miles an hour. There was a guardrail on our right. If I needed to get out of the van, there was no room to open the wheelchair lift. We'd have to limp another quarter mile down the road to an exit ramp. While Carol was on the phone with AAA, there was a knock on our passenger side window. We looked up to see a truck parked behind us. The guy was from a program called Who's Your Helpers? It's paid for by the Indiana DOT. They have trucks constantly roaming the interstates looking for people who need help. And we did. Carol told the AAA we had help, and thanks, we'd renew later. Our spare tire is stored underneath the van in the rear. And this van's over 20 years old. I don't know when or if that tire has ever been used. The van used to belong to my cousin Nancy before she passed away. The guy had trouble loosening the bolts to get the tire out from under the van, but he eventually got it loose. It was a very hot and humid day in the high 80s. We had to turn off the engine and the air conditioning while he worked. We opened up doors and windows, but it didn't help much. This guy is a superhero, in my opinion. He's working on the left side of the van with vehicles speeding by and a terrible heat and humidity, and he rescued us. We tried to offer him a tip, but he said he had to refuse. It was against policy. It was scary enough as events unfolded, but over the next few days, I couldn't help but think how much worse it could have been. If it had been a front tire, we would have been in big trouble. I began to wonder if I'd ever have the guts to get back in the van. And I knew I wouldn't do it until we had 4 new tires. Then becomes one of those awful decisions you make when you're a person of my age, in my condition, and scared to death of dying. You don't go out and buy the most expensive set of Michelin tires because you know you're not going to live that long. Carol got 5 new tires at a reasonable price, but not the top of the line. On Saturday, June 21st, Carol and I had the discussion I'd been avoiding for 8 months. I asked, "Do I need to move out of here?" "Yes," was the immediate answer. So we talked it out. How did we get here? I explained why I'd been dragging my feet for so long. I admitted I'd been using Heather as an excuse. I figured as long as she was here, there was no motive to do anything fast. I also talked about the need to get our finances in order, to hire a roommate. I told her when we talked months ago, I asked her to let me pursue the roommate option. Even though I'd done nothing directly to that effort, I was willing to let that go. Everything I did to try to get my financial situation in order was part of that roommate pursuit. So to the extent that I could not solve the financial issues, that constituted an attempt and a failure at the roommate solution. I was ready to actively begin pursuing the transition to a skilled nursing facility. On June 22nd, I had my first online counseling appointment. I had plenty to discuss. Carol and I began making appointments to tour nursing facilities. On July 2nd, we began with Wellbrook of Avon, where I thought I was third on their waiting list. Turns out the guy keeping the list didn't work there anymore, and they had restarted the list. Now I dropped to number 8. My only previous tour of a facility was the one in Greenwood that Rich and Kathy took me to before my dad died. Greenwood only had shared occupancy rooms that were very small. Avon had private rooms that would be ideal. There'd be plenty of space to set up a computer desk, my laser printer, my 3D printer, and a bookcase full of electronic gadgets. I was in love with the place. The video version of this episode shows what the rooms look like. Now I was in the horrible position of waiting for 8 people to die so I could have a decent place to live. Well, let's say maybe they got better and went home. At least I hope so. The list is further complicated by the fact that they already have people there for assisted living or for rehab. And if any of those residents need to move up to long-term skilled nursing, they get to jump the line. I checked with Avon about a month or so ago. I've moved up from 8th to 7th over the course of a year. The next day, I began calling other nursing facilities, especially those owned by the same chain as the one in Avon. I also went public on Facebook with my plans to actively pursue an SNF placement. Back on my 60th birthday, we had a big party for me at St. Gabriel's Cafeteria, and we joked about meeting again in 10 years. I suggested some of the people at the party wouldn't live that long, and I was right. Many friends and family had died over those 10 years, and I seriously didn't think I would live another 10 years. So it was time to celebrate again. We planned a big birthday bash here at my home. It would not only celebrate my 70 years of survival, but it would be one last party in the house that held so many celebrations of birthdays, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, and baby and wedding showers. The celebration was everything I hoped it would be. It was not just about celebrating my birthday, but about celebrating this home that's meant so much to me, my family, and my friends. Back on my 60th birthday, we took a photo of me with 4 of the most important people in my life, Rich and Kathy Logan, and Judy and Ann Chapman. It served as my Facebook banner photo for 10 years. So we recreated that photo for my 70th birthday. Now the layout of the photo doesn't lend itself very well to being my Facebook banner, so I still have the one for my 60th on Facebook. But you can see the comparison in the video version of this podcast. Next, I'm going to show you a video of a speech I made on that 70th birthday. I provided a link to that full video and the one that I made on my 60th. Here's an excerpt of the video from my 70th. It begins with shots of people arriving and eating all the food we'd laid out. And then I made a speech. Here's what I said. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to help me celebrate. This is a hell of a milestone. 10 years ago, we had a big party for me. Everybody said, well, 10 years from now, we'll get together and do it again. I'm thinking, yeah, right. I'm going to be here 10 years. But I made a joke. I said, I'm not going to buy the stamps for the invitations, because I think some of you people won't be here in 10 years. And unfortunately, that was true. In the past 10 years, we lost my dad, my Uncle Keith, my Aunt Barbara, my cousin Nancy, our good friend George Brent, and Stu's brother Charlie, and some people that I worked with back when I was working as a programmer. My good friend Buzz is gone. And my good friend Mike Gregory from college is gone. So I'm really beating the odds every day.
Yeah.
I'm on about 5 different Facebook groups for people with my disability. And as far as I can tell, I'm the oldest.
Are you the oldest?
I think I'm the oldest. Nobody has claimed. People say I should call it Guinness Book of Records. Maybe I will. But I did find one guy who had my disability that made it to 76. And he's gone now. So that's something to aim for, another record. But you know, I'm only here because I'm so blessed to have all of you supporting me. As I've explained before, I look around at the support that I have, and the only logical explanation is that there's a God that loves me and put all of you in my life. And I do my best to be a blessing to you whenever I can. I can never pay it back, but I try to pay it forward as much as I can. So, as you all know, we're going to be already shopping for a nursing facility for me. And I'll be leaving this place. I've been here since I was 3 years old. And you've been here in this room for countless birthdays and baby showers and anniversaries and Easter breakfasts and Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas and every kind of celebration you can think of. Yeah, all that stuff. So, this is a celebration. New Year's Eve. Yeah, New Year's Eve. That's what it is. So this is a celebration. Say goodbye to 3119, because it's probably the last big bash we'll have here. So I'm glad you could all be here to share this with me. I know a lot of times when I talk about going into a facility, people say, "Oh, we can't let you do that." Well, be honest. There's not much you can do to help beyond what you've already been doing. And so it's time to move on. And I don't think people really appreciate what it takes to keep me here. The 2 people that know the most are Carol, who's been living here off and on with me since Dad died, and my good friends Barb and Josh, who are here, who gave me over 5 years of their time and love and care. And I'm deeply indebted to all of them for everything that they did to get me this far. But it's time to move on, and I'm looking forward to it. If I can just get through the waiting list, we'll be in good shape. So anyway, thanks for coming, and I think you all want to sing. So go ahead.
We're going to sing.
All right.
Oh, no.
Yep, we're singing. So you're leading it off.
I got the word.
1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday to
The video continues with a montage of photos taken that day, including a photo of me and the Logans and the Chapmans. I really did mean it when I said I was enthusiastic about the move. Avon was so much better than Greenwood. I could easily see myself living there comfortably for the rest of my life. These days, I'm not so sure. We'll get to that explanation later. Shortly after my birthday, I applied to the Guinness World Records. Turns out it only costs $5 to apply. I claimed that I was the oldest living person with spinal muscular atrophy, type 2. The first step in applying is to do a search to see if there's an existing record. The only SMA record on file was for the largest single charitable donation for medical treatment. Zolgensma is a one-time gene therapy treatment available only to children 24 months or younger. When it was first approved by the FDA, Zolgensma was the most expensive drug on the market. Since then, it's dropped to number 6. The other expensive drugs are also one-time gene therapy treatments. On June 16, 2021, in the United Arab Emirates, the Red Crescent covered the cost of the treatment for a Syrian girl. Her donation was for 8,045,596 AED. That's $2,190,469 US dollars. By the way, the SMA treatment that I use daily costs above $350,000 per year and is covered by Medicare and Medicaid. Recently, the FDA approved Advisma for patients older than 2 years. It's the same drug as Zolgensma, with a different delivery method, appropriate for older children and adults. Zolgensma can be given to infants by IV. Advisma requires a spinal injection with a course of steroids before and after the treatment. Its wholesale price is listed at $2.59 million. My guess is that doesn't include the cost of the entire treatment protocol. That's just the drug itself. I don't think it's something to be proud of that such a potentially life-saving treatment is the most expensive, or that it required a charitable donation to cover the cost. If I could set the world record for being the oldest SMA patient, it would be a much more positive story. Guinness says it takes 12 to 20 weeks to get a response, and I waited for months for an answer. The only way you could expedite a claim was to pay $1,000 to fast-track it. I put out some feelers to Genentech, the company that makes Evrysdi, the drug I'm on. I thought it might be good publicity for them to say that someone taking their treatment had lived so long, even if I'd only been on the treatment for a few years. They weren't interested. I wasn't so interested in becoming famous for the record. I'd be excited to find someone who was older than me with SMA type 2. But if I could get official recognition, I knew it would mean a lot to the SMA community as a whole. I had a positive impact on the people in the online groups I participated in. People look up to me. They're inspired by me. They say, if this guy can live that long, maybe I can too. It might be good for fundraising. In September 2025, I participated in a fundraiser for SMA, and they were impressed that I'd lived to age 70. I was hoping I'd get word that I'd been awarded the record before that event in September, but it didn't happen. After about 7 months, Guinness finally got back to me, and they said they would not recognize a record for a medical condition unless they'd been published in a peer-reviewed journal. I thought that was ridiculous. I mean, I had my medical records from my doctor confirming my diagnosis. I have a birth certificate. That should be enough. The distinction between SMA type 2 and type 3 is that people with type 2 never walked. I could get testimony from friends like Stu Byram and Michael and Pat McGraw, all of whom are older than me and have known me my whole life. They could swear I never walked, confirming I was type 2 and not type 3. It wasn't enough. I still claim the record for anyone who asks, and I encourage them to prove me wrong. And so far, no one has. I recently wrote a draft of my obituary, and I claimed that I was the oldest living SMA type 2 before I died. By the way, I'll turn 71 on July 12th this year. That's 35 days after I'm writing the script. Okay, that's all for today. There'll be a brief bonus episode coming up next, and then will continue my struggle to find suitable placement for me at a skilled nursing facility. They'll provide safety and a quality of life to keep me comfortable for the remainder of my days. So as always, if you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 per month. You'll get early access to the podcast and other exclusive content. I'm not in this for money, but every bit helps. As always, my deepest thanks to my financial supporters and everyone who supports me in any way. It means more to me than words could ever express. And even if you can't provide financial support, share links to the podcast on social media so I can grow my audience. All my back episodes are available, so check those out. If you have any comments or questions or other feedback, feel free to comment on any of the platforms where you found the podcast. I'll see you next time as we continue contemplating a life. Until then, fly safe, everyone.